Welcome to Only for Your Ears, and today's episode 28, The Ice Maiden by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as Luscious Deception. First, we'll start off with the structure as usual. The summary, where I'll highlight the most important points and I'll digress. And on some occasions, I will talk about reflections that have come up in the summary. There are several versions to this story, and we will be looking at two types of versions. Then I'll move on to my critical review on how this storyline plays in today's society, using examples from the summary where I digress, and then we'll use examples from a film, a book, and something from everyday life. The next one will be the triggers and the trigger points. What triggered me in this storyline? And there are three triggers that I will mention, and I will go over and show you why I was triggered and how I have resolved that trigger in my life, if I have. Thank you. Let's begin. The Ice Maiden, Luscious Deception. The Ice Maiden is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen that tells the story of a young Swiss boy named Rudy, who is orphaned as a child and raised by his uncle in a small mountain village. Rudy is a skilled mountain climber and hunter, known for his fearlessness and his ability to scale even the most treacherous peaks. I digress. I get the impression Rudy feels he needs to prove himself. One day, Rudy encounters a beautiful girl named Babette, who lives in the village in the valley. They fall in love, and Rudy becomes determined to marry her. However, Babette's godmother, a wealthy widow, has other plans for her and wants her to marry a wealthy miller's son. To prove his worth, Rudy decides to climb a dangerous mountain to obtain a rare and valuable flower for Babette. I digress. Why does he feel such a need to prove himself? Is it because he's an orphan and not wealthy? This is typical even in today's society. If you're poor or considered a minority, whether it be economic, race, disability, education, or a woman, we always have to prove our worth. Whereas if you're rich, for example, or a higher class, you don't. In the other version, it's the miller disapproves of their relationship and challenges Rudy to an impossible task, yet again, climbing a dangerous mountain to bring back a live baby eaglet. Yet again, the miller sets an impossible bar for Rudy, knowing full well he can't do it himself, in the hope Rudy falls short, and falls Rudy falls short and fails or dies. Hater. Rudy's jealousy surfaces when Babette flirts with her cousin, which leads to a confrontation between them. I digress. Babette is overjoyed at two men fighting over her heart. I also think she is immature too. While upset, Rudy encounters the Ice Maiden, who had killed his mother and marked him as her own during his infancy. He kisses the Ice Maiden before returning to Babette and seeking for her forgiveness. I digress. Rudy is tempted by the maiden's attraction to him and him to her. This kiss soothes his hurt ego as well. Upon reflection, temptation, the inner struggle Rudy encounters with the Ice Maiden can be seen as a metaphor for the of temptations and inner struggles we all face in life. So true. I digress. This is true. Jesus says temptation must come, but it's what we do with it that shapes who we are. Rudy's inability to resist the Ice Maiden's allure ultimately leads to his tragic end, serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of staying true to oneself and one's values. Hence the title, Luscious Deception. I digress. This is so true. It reminds me of the film Damaged with Jeremy Irons and Juliette Binoche, which we will discuss later on. The original version, unknown to Rudy, the Ice Maiden, a supernatural being who rules over the glaciers and mountains, has been watching him since he was a child. I digress. She claimed him like you're mine, and he had no say over this. This kind of dominant, possessive, one minded obsession is dangerous. I digress again. I can't really call it love, but more like property. You're mine, because I say so. She has claimed his life as her own, jealous of his love for Babette and wanting him for herself. As Rudy climbs the mountain, the Ice Maiden uses her power to create a deadly storm, hoping to cause his demise. I digress. Genuine love wouldn't set dangerous traps to kill their loved one. Despite the Ice Maiden's attempt, Rudy successfully retrieves the flower and returns to Babette. I digress. Rudy's love pushes through and pushes through and surpasses what hateful, nefarious plans the Ice Maiden has. They become engaged and their wedding day approaches. On the eve of their wedding, the Ice Maiden visits Rudy in a dream, warning him that she will claim him as her own. I digress. This ego driven, covetous being has ensnared herself into his subconscious mind. The next day, as the couple crosses a treacherous glacier to reach the church, the Ice Maiden finally succeeds in her plan. She causes Rudy to slip and fall into a deep crevice, taking his life. In the end, the village mourns Rudy's tragic death, and Babette is left heartbroken, having lost the love of her life to the cold embrace of the Ice Maiden. I digress. So, did she really love Rudy, or did she need to win the competition over Babette? In the other version, as their wedding day approaches, Babette has a disturbing dream about cheating on Rudy with her cousin. I digress. Does Babette have real heartfelt feelings for her cousin? Maybe she's conflicted in how she feels about these two men. The night before the wedding, the couple goes to a small island where the boat drifts away. When Rudy dives into the water to retrieve it, the Ice Maiden kisses him one last time, causing him to drown. Babette is left alone on the island, mourning her lost love. I digress. This maiden had to have the last word with a selfish gesture, where Rudy's fate was sealed with her allure, which he couldn't resist. That luscious kiss hypnotized him as his lungs got immersed in water. The reflection. Spiritual existential themes. Anderson explores themes of life, death, fate, and the struggle between good and evil in The Ice Maiden. Rudy's journey, his encounters with the Ice Maiden, and his eventual tragic fate can be seen as a reflection of the human experience and the challenges we face in life. Exactly. The overall conclusion. Good versus evil. The tale also presents a classic struggle between good and evil, with Rudy representing the goodness and the warmth of human nature, while the Ice Maiden embodies the cold and destructive forces of the natural world. The story's tragic conclusion emphasizes the ongoing battle between these opposing forces that exist within each and every one of us and the fragile nature of human life. I digress. I believe that good and evil are both sides of the coin. One has to balance the other. Now, this was an incredible story. I love it so much because it really reflects, again, as the story has said, reflects the dichotomy, the struggle that we have within us, and that luscious deception. It tastes so good when we're doing it. It tastes so good when we scratch that itch that we should never have scratched. And then to look at the rest of our body and see that we've got a huge rash after we've scratched it. And it's the same thing. We struggle with that. Temptation must come, but it's what we do with it and it's how we deal with it. Let's take a look at my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in society. This is one of my favorite fairy tales because it teaches me about being honest with one's self, about how one truly feels. And if you can't be honest with yourself, you can't really be honest with anyone else. Self deception is a type of deceit that can cause the most personal damage in relationships, finances, mental, and family are the most important areas where self deceit rears its ugly head by causing absolute havoc to everyone involved. Rudy is truly in love with Babette, but he is pulled by the allure of the Ice Maiden, who really isn't human like Babette, but, but like Babette. Yet he's angry at Babette for flirting with her cousin, which triggers him. I believe he doesn't feel good enough for Babette, and at this moment falls under the seductive lure of the Ice Maiden, which makes him feel better about himself. His insecurity keeps him in a toxic, deceitful relationship with the Ice Maiden, energizing her immense power to consequently determine Rudy's fate. Here are some examples from life, the Bible, and a film. So the first one is an experience from the pastor in a church that I went to when I was in Vancouver, Canada. And here's the highlight from the summary. I digress. This is so true. Jesus says temptation must come, but what's what what it's what we do with it that shapes who we are. This reminds me of a great testimony I heard in the church I attended to while living in Vancouver. One of the guest pastors confessed to being sexually attracted to his good friend's wife, who also worked for the church. However, he kept it a secret, hoping it would go away. Again, Jesus said temptation must come. So he prayed for the desire to go away, while at the same time feeling guilty. Right there and then, he was being deceitful to himself and to his wife and to his friend. Then one day he plucked up the courage to say something to his good friend. Now, his friend's response was insightful. He was very calm about it and advised him to tell his wife right away. Because while he was keeping his feelings a secret, he was lying not only to himself but to his wife and good friend. Exactly. Can you see how this kind of self deceit spreads like a wildfire? So he told his wife the next day. And he said, as soon as he conveyed these feelings to his wife, the sexual attraction just disappeared. And he was so confused. Well, I have had this happen to me in regard to jealousy. I admitted my feelings to the spirit, and within a few seconds, it vanished. Why? It's speaking forth the truth of honesty that dissolves whatever were that toxic feelings were eating away at you. The courage to be honest. That's why this whole situation healed. That's why he didn't end up destroying his marriage, destroying his friendship, and destroying himself because of a sexual desire. So I think that was really interesting, and I was glad that I was there to hear that testimony because it mirrored what I had experienced with jealousy a couple of years ago in Barcelona. Now we're going to take a look at the film Damaged with Jeremy Irons and Juliette Binoche. Dr. Stephen Fleming, Jeremy Irons, plays a physician who has entered politics and become a minister, lives in London with his wife Ingrid, played by Miranda Richardson, and daughter Sally. Their adult son Martin, a young journalist, lives elsewhere in London. At a reception, Stephen meets a young woman, Anna Barton, Juliette Binoche, the daughter of a British diplomat and a 4 times married French woman. Anna introduces herself as a close friend of Martin, and she and Stephen are instantly attracted to each other. Luscious deception right there. Sometime later, Martin brings Anna to meet his parents at their elegant townhouse and reveals they are romantically involved. The sexual tension between Stephen and Anna is apparent, although Martin and Ingrid seem unaware. Anyway, as the story unfolds and Anna reveals some interesting tidbits, for example, Anna describes deep her brother's death after he had expressed incestuous desire, saying that he wanted Anna all to himself and had never wanted her to grow up. She says that damaged people are dangerous and that she hates possessiveness. This is luscious deception that her brother couldn't handle. He couldn't handle those feelings. I think, but to be quite honest, what 16-year-old boy or 16-year-old girl could handle having such incestuous feelings? Which is consequently the luscious deception that her brother couldn't handle, which consequently ended in her brother's suicide. She explains that damaged people are dangerous, hence, I believe that she was just as damaged as her brother, but she concealed it. 4 marriages, one after the other, if not worse. I don't think she ever got over her brother's death, and she took this revelation as being a superior power over people, especially men. She doesn't really love anybody. All she wants is to destroy people because of her overestimated sense of manipulative power. There's a sense of narcissism here. I don't believe she's ever happy. She's a very toxic person. But what happens at the end of the film, it's breathtaking. They are immersed in this sexual passion. They cannot stop. They cannot stop. I think the guilt and the luscious deception has just such a hold on them that they just can't break free. Well, one day, while they're making love, while they're having this rampant sex, um, Stephen's son, Martin, comes by the flat and he sees them in bed having sex. And he's in shock. And the father says, no, 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 Martin, wait. And he's walking backwards. He doesn't realize what he's doing. He slips and falls over the balcony to his death. And then, of course, Stephen, the father, Jeremy Irons, runs down the stairs and holds his body to him and just holds him and feels the life and the spirit slip away out of his dead son. It's really amazing. And it's tragic because what happens is that that whole family is broken up. He goes to live in somewhere, some remote place in Italy, um, completely gives up his political life and him being a doctor. And the only time that he ever sees Anna again is walking through an airport with her ex-lover's daughter and her ex-lover. And that's the end of it. It's the end. It's a complete. So she was the dangerous person. Her brother was dangerous, yes, and damaged, but so was she. In fact, she was even worse. In fact, she has caused more damage than her brother could ever have caused, I believe. Now, let's take a look at the last one. And this all comes under the temptation. So it's the same, a digress. King David's affair, okay, in the Bible. David's initial interactions, King David, the blessed David of that killed the big bear with the 3 stones. David's initial interactions with Bathsheba are described in 2 Samuel 2:11. Sorry. While walking on the roof of his palace, David sees a beautiful woman bathing. He inquires about her, discovering her identity as the wife of Uriah, still desiring her. That luscious deception again. David later has sex with Bathsheba, impregnating her. That was quick. Only takes once, I guess. Together with his wife Diana, regard David's actions as an example of rape. Well, yes, kind of. Because, I mean, she's not going to say no to the king, is she? While the army was on a campaign, David summoned Uriah in the hope that Uriah would have sex with Bathsheba, and in the end, be convinced that the child she would eventually bear belonged to him. However, Uriah was unwilling to disregard rules applying to warriors on the campaign, preferring to remain with the palace troops rather than sleep in his own bed. After repeated efforts to convince Uriah to sleep with his wife failed, David gave an order to his general Joab that Uriah should be placed in the front lines in battle, where he would be in much greater danger. You know, this is so toxic, people. This is so toxic. This is what sometimes love, but I think more than love, it's not just love, it's really sex and possession and jealousy that made him do what he did. That Uriah should be placed on the front lines where he could be in much greater danger. Additionally, David and Uriah himself carry his message back to the army. Uriah was ultimately killed during the siege of Rabbah, and Bathsheba mourned him. She loved him. Then David made her his wife. Come on, let's get married. He's dead now. Taking her into his house, where she gave birth to his son or his child. God dealt with King David. He couldn't escape what he had done and the murder of her husband. No, God dealt with him, and he had karma to pay for what he did. And I can guarantee he didn't like it. But I think he also realized that he was blinded by this lust, by this luscious deception. Now let's move on to the trigger points. Now there are 3 examples that really remind me of luscious deception. One is Lindsey Graham. Now, who is Lindsey Graham? Lindsey Graham is this Republican politician from South Carolina who was very, very good friends with John McCain before he died. They had a long, long friendship. And Lindsey Graham is what you call a bit of a feminine homosexual man. Nothing wrong with that, people. And he has been gay for all of his life. This is just the way it is. He's been with men all of his life, and everybody knows it. Nobody cares that he's homosexual. I mean, they even call him the Queen of Swords in Washington because everybody knows. I mean, he could run for president if he wanted to, and nobody would care that he was a single man or that he's flat out gay. But he cares. And he's a blatant hypocrite. And one of the things that really bothers me is that everybody knows that he uses the sex workers. He uses sex workers, male sex workers, all the time when he's in Washington, doing whatever tricks that he needs them to do. And then when it came to a particular bill that had to be passed to protect sex workers, you know what he did? He voted no. He voted against them. And this is what really infuriated the sex workers, these men, these lovers that he's been with. And so they got together and decided to spread the dirt about the Queen of Swords in Washington. And it got around. And this was quite harmful to him. Wasn't that harmful, but it was quite harmful to him because everybody knows who he is. He's just a blatant hypocrite. And this is what really triggers me, is that he lies, he's deceit, he's a lack of strength. Maybe I thought I was weak like Lindsay. You know, for a long time, I spent a long time being a people pleaser. I was so afraid to be myself. And people just felt that I was an oddball anyway. And I tried to fit in. I just tried and tried and tried to fit in. They knew that I didn't. So I tried even more. And what happened was, it's like in the end, I couldn't fake it anymore. I had to be myself. And it was like, they were angry for me being myself, but they knew me trying to fit in with them wasn't real either. And so I ended up just stepping into my own power and being myself. And I think that's one of the things that triggers me is the lies, his deceit about himself. I just wish he would come forward and step into his big man pants and just be the homosexual, the man that he is and that everybody knows and still loves. The cardinal and the sex worker, another trigger. This is really connected to the church and just bothered me like nobody's business. Who is the cardinal? Well, he's the he belongs to the church, the Vatican in Rome. What happened? Well, what happened is that a friend of a student that I taught told told her this story. Well, this guy that she knew was gay, is gay, and he met some guy, and they started going out together, and they had a great time, and they had a good time for about 2 weeks, and then he vanished like thin air for about a whole month, and he wondered where he was. He couldn't find him anywhere, and he couldn't ring him because he wasn't picking up his phone. Well, a couple of weeks later, he returned where other, from Rome. And he said to him, "Oh my goodness, where have you been? I've been looking for you everywhere, trying to call you, nothing." He said, "I've been at the Vatican." So he said, "Oh, the Vatican. Oh, did you like it there?" He said, "No, I've been in the Vatican." And he would look at him kind of strange. He said, "Well, what do you mean you've been in the Vatican?" He says, "Exactly, I've been in the Vatican." And he says, "Well, what were you doing in the Vatican?" He says, "I was with one of the cardinals for a whole month." And then he said, "He paid me through me. I was able to get whatever I wanted." He said, "Just go downstairs. There's a village behind the Vatican, and there's shops downstairs, rooms upstairs where they can do whatever they want, shops downstairs, and you can pick out aftershave, suits, shoes, whatever you want, and I will treat you to them. Now you know where our donations go. Now you know exactly where our donations go." And so I couldn't believe I was in shock, but I really wasn't in shock. And I'm so grateful that the LGBT community has been able to persuade certain churches to welcome the LGBT community. I just think it's a perfect example of what I've read in the Bible and God's word. God so loved his children that he sacrificed his only son. And that's all I need to say. God so loved his children, he sacrificed his own son. He loved all of his children, irrespective of what color, what race, what disability, and what sexuality they had, who they loved. He loved them all. So, but what I hated is the condescension of the Catholic Church. This sort of thing. Let me pray for you. Oh, blessed is the child. Come here, you've sinned. Well, they're upstairs doing bang, 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 having a good old time. And at the same time, acting as though they're not doing anything wrong. Well, in reality, they're not doing anything wrong. But before it became accepted more and more by the church and also by the Pope, who can see it. He doesn't spread it, but he can see it. And it has been accepted more and more by the church. This is a good thing, but I hate the pitiful condescension of these cardinal people as though they're above everybody else, and they're not. And this is what really, really irks me. And their luscious deception is is the same as a sinner's luscious deception, or if not worse. So that's the thing that really, really bothers me. The lies and the condescension and the blatant sin and sort of like acting as though they're above the law, they're above everything because they've given their lives to Christ. This last trigger really got to me. The father of the bride and groom. There was a story, I think it was in Dear Abby in the newspaper about 10 years ago, about this father whose daughter was getting married and her groom. So they invited the daughter to stay at their house because the church was so close. And that night, the mother and the daughter slept in the same bed, and the father and the groom slept in the same bed. Well, to talk about luscious deception again, the two men, the father in law, the soon to be father in law, ended up having sex with the groom. They ended up having just full blown sex, sleeping together, being together, doing what they needed to do together. And I don't think they were drunk either. I do not think they were drunk. I think they did what they did. And the next day, the father walked his daughter down the aisle as though nothing had happened. I mean, right there was adultery and sin that took place. I mean, I don't know if these two people are even married now. And the husband, do you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife? Of course. Do you take this man to be your lawful wedded husband? I do. And the marriage already has a bitter, bitter stigma and taste, and disloyalty, and adultery, and lies. So this really, really, really triggered me because it showed nothing but total disrespect. I've received a lot of this in my own life, and so when this happened, I just felt like, in my own life, I've been with men in my life, and I knew they didn't really care about me, or they didn't really like me as much as I liked them, and they were using me. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And sometimes you settle for a man just to look as though you're not a wallflower, knowing that full well you don't really like the guy that much, but you just want to look as though you fit in with everybody else. So I've received the disrespect, and I've expected that. I've experienced that most of my life. I think when I went to Vancouver, things changed a bit, and I was grateful for that. But anyway, those were the three triggers that I'm talking about. And so this is the end of today's episode and Luscious Deception. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd like to close off with my typical expression. Healing is a lifelong gift, blessing, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong gift, blessing, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. So take care, have a great weekend, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to. It doesn't cost you anything. So until next week, goodbye.